Good morning or good afternoon, depending upon where you are located at. So just a quick introduction. My name is Gary Steer. I am GSX's Chief Operating Officer and Chief Technology Officer. You may notice that my normal partner in crime, Olivier, is not with me. He had the nerve to take off, so I have replaced him with a complete and total upgrade. So Garth, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Garth Fisher. I am a member of the Client Satisfaction team here at GSX, as well as a Client Satisfaction Manager. Welcome.
I noticed you didn't challenge that complete upgrade comment.
Not
Olivier
yet.
may not be happy when he gets back from this vacation. So just a quick review of what's in our agenda for today. Just take a quick view through, a name, some of the new features that we have, when it makes sense to look at something like OA instead of Outlook, the full client that you would install. We'll look at our performance test results, let some time for a Q&A, and then, let everybody go on their way. So the first point here, what's in a name? I personally, I'm kind of bad at this. Technically speaking, it's no longer OA. It used to be Outlook Web Access a while back. It then became Outlook Web App. The proper current name is Outlook on the Web. I have seen people online getting confused on different parts of this where they're calling it Outlook 365. You should be careful with that one. Technically, the Outlook client that you download and install is part of the Office 365 version or suite. So you download the Office 365 suite, install that, and use Outlook. So people kind of are mixing that term up. Outlook on the Web is the current and proper term that should be used in there.
You know what, Gary? People will always call it OA, no matter what they do.
Yeah, yes, they will. And I do, and you'll see it all over here. And interestingly, in a unrelated technical item I was working on last week, while doing some searching, I came across an article, in a Microsoft support article, where it was called OA, referencing a newer version of the product. It's just something that has gotten into people's language. For the Exchange purists out there that are wondering why I didn't begin with Exchange Web Connect going all the way back, I was talking about Outlook versions, that are web-based. So I personally excluded that one because it didn't have an Outlook name inside of it. So if we look at what's new in UTOA or Outlook on the Web or OA, as I'll probably just default to, here's a list of the features that just got put in.
Right. Thanks, Gary. I'll take this one here. So I just want to take the time to call out some of the new features that I find interesting with Outlook on the Web or OA. The one main thing is, the basic look and feel. So there's lots of new colors and new icons. So it gives you a cleaner, smoother, richer user interface and therefore a richer experience. There's also better search capabilities. So essentially, the new Outlook on the Web, it anticipates what your search based on your recent conversations as well as who you work with the most. So based on that, it will be able to provide you with more accurate and faster search results. They've added something called dark mode. Essentially, you hit the toggle switch and it darkens the whole entire look and feel of the user interface. This could be good for those who prefer a less bright interface, or it can actually be good to reduce eye strain in low light environments as well. Suggested replies. Outlook on the Web now uses intelligent tech to offer quick replies. Essentially, you get an email in. At the bottom of that email, you see a short quick reply message options presented to you towards the bottom. And you can just click on one of those, and it just, boom, just sends that back as your quick reply. There's now Teams integration. So, now you can actually schedule Teams meetings directly from the new Outlook on the Web interface. Joyful animations, Gary loves that one, or joy in email. Essentially, it's a feature where Outlook will show a celebratory burst, OA, will show a celebratory burst of colorful shapes in the reading pane, or like balloons and stuff like that, when you open a message that includes words like, happy birthday or congratulations. There's now better meeting smarts. So when you create a meeting, it'll auto add an icon to that meeting based on the type of event that you've just scheduled. As part of that comes also Smart Room. It'll try, and I'm going to say try, to find the best room for your meetings based on the attendees, the time it was scheduled for, the availability or your availability, as well as some of your preferences that you could have already set up. As a part of that, it also goes ahead and finds the addresses for locations that you may have added to those meetings. There's new groups management. So, it's faster, simpler group creation. And along with that, you get these nice, richer group cards. So it just, again, enhances the whole look and feel of the whole experience. There's new favorites functionality. So now you can add specific folders, people, and even categories as favorites. So, for example, if I make Gary my favorite in Outlook on the web, I'll just get like a one-line, his name right there with any number of emails that I may have received from him.
That actually I find really useful. But I get 300 emails, 400 emails a week, and I, read them, but getting back to them can be a little slow at times. But it's actually a really nice feature that you can see a person with the number of emails that you're sitting on, so that, when somebody takes the number one position, maybe it's time to respond to them.
Right. And I agree with that. That's definitely a nice feature. And lastly, and these are not all the new features, by the way, just the ones I felt like focusing on. And the last one I want to touch on is the simplified ribbon at the top. So, a lot of people hate the old ribbon. It takes up too much real estate. There's some of the complaints you may hear. So with this simplified ribbon, it's a lot smaller, takes up less space, so you can really view the user interface or see more of the user interface. And, of course, I'm sure you can always toggle back to the old ribbon if you prefer that. Gary?
So just one thing to note, and it's really a topic for a different, webinar on user behavior patterns that we can certainly have at some point. But you'll notice that there are a lot more home user features coming into the application suite itself here. The reason Garth, said I love that joyful animations is it reminds me of what my iPhone does. You send a message and now there's lasers and it lets you know and shakes and fancy, but doesn't strike me as much of a business feature. However, the convergence of home and business technology at certain points is something that is actually influencing how users are interacting with these technologies. And so when you're looking to ensure that your users are getting, what they need to be productive, some of the things that they would have from negative home behaviors, like giving up after 5 seconds, literally, per Gartner studies, that they actually have started to creep their way into business cases and business scenarios. So let's look at just a few times where, we know that OA may be needed depending upon environment or other items. One that we've come across multiple times. If you're going to be installing a client, so I am putting a fat client on my, desktop operating systems in the company. Actually, Garth and I years ago worked together at a company where we specialized in high-end domino migrations, really difficult ones that needed a lot of planning and a lot of careful, execution. In those cases, we had, machines that could not be upgraded because of line of business applications, because of, just this one can never take that patch. It has to still support this. So it really put us in a situation that we had a lot of, moving pieces to look at and keep your eyes on. That can be complicated, and there will be times where, ultimately you need to defer kind of that last bullet. You realize that the patching didn't work as well as expected, and you're forced to keep employees productive even in those cases. Other, use cases along the lines of, older hardware, again, many times, and even the newest client versions of Outlook don't work on some older operating systems that we still encounter frequently. So we find ourselves in a situation where, you've got to upgrade hardware, maybe you're waiting for it to come in, but it can be a fair amount of work just to be certain that everything is ready, not just in a migration case, but really if you're looking to hit a new set of functionality, if you're activating an additional workload on Office 365, at any of these given times, companies really should evaluate what will keep people the most productive.
Very good point. All right, in another instance where Outlook on the web may be more preferred over the full-blown Outlook client is when you have these shared user experiences. We see this a lot of times in these a lot of retail and manufacturing personas or clients, where essentially there's one shared computer, where there's multiple people accessing that same computer. What that essentially means is that there's shared user profiles, at least for Outlook, right? So there's one actual Windows user. You open Outlook and, pick your profile and you log in. So that can lead to accidental caching a lot of times, or, honestly, people just completely forget to log out. And that's one of the worst case scenarios where the next person comes in and they can actually send an email as the person that was there before them. They can send a nasty gram to the president of the company and it will go out to somebody else. Not exactly a nice thing to do. So, even if people are perfect at closing Outlook, every time they're done with their session, it's still going to be slow to connect for each user profile, or Outlook user profile, that is. Therefore, adding to some lower productivity. The client load time, as in the Outlook client load time, of course, in this type of scenario where you're sharing the one computer, the rapid logging in and logging out functionality of Outlook on the web or OA will absolutely fit better. Remote desktop environments. And this is the case where, the Outlook cache or the cache of Outlook can cause potential issues. If you're not aware, Outlook uses a cache file called an OST file. Essentially, it keeps a subset of your messages to make the whole experience a whole lot better, or at least the perceived user experience better. When you're talking about these remote desktop environments, things like Citrix, etc., it can be, maintaining that OST file can become very problematic. So, a lot of times you would switch Outlook into online mode, in which case it doesn't rely on that OST file. But of course, Outlook does not perform as well in that type of a configuration. From what Gary was saying earlier, same thing back when we worked together on some of those migrations. A large manufacturing plant, they were using a virtual desktop environment in their implementation. And there was a lot of slowness when they were using Outlook. So, what they did, they decided to turn off the caching mode, essentially putting it in online mode. Complete disaster. It was even worse. Outlook performed even worse than it did the other way around. So, clearly, in that situation, Outlook on the web or OA would clearly be a better solution.
Yeah, and in that case, the client was re-downloading this cache every single time. There are third-party products that, if you want to evaluate them, that they're out there that can help you in that situation. I, have no opinion either which way. It really depends upon what fits your use case the best and what your users need. Ultimately, it's just a problem that has to be looked at and addressed. And so we're, just kind of running through a few of them here. Probably the last batch of cases where people really kind of get forced to OA that you may need to consider or may need to look at. Higher security environments. So if you're in a situation where, and the one I can think of that I had a discussion was around a similar to the, retail store persona. It was actually a chain of stores that had shared computers that they didn't want to leave any cache data on. The Outlook OST file. I would say Outlook gives you security through obscurity. And what I mean by that is, it doesn't necessarily show you that it's loading a file. If you try to connect it to the wrong file, it knows and it will just purge the data that's in there. But the files themselves are actually not encrypted. And so with an appropriate tool, you can pick up an OST file and you can read it. There are, we could look at the very bottom bullet. We'll come to that in a second. There are some things that can be done. But it is, in general, it's something you should be aware of. You may want to consider a third-party encryption product. It gets really complicated fast. If you're in that kind of a security constraint, please do the next step too. OA has what it calls offline mode. So the Outlook web app or the Outlook on the web client is meant to operate, in an offline mode for people who go on an airplane or things like that. Personally, I think you'll find that for someone who's truly a road warrior, it's not going to meet their needs. I would never default to that. Just personal preference, but it's something that's there. And notice that the command lit is called Set OA Mailbox Policy. So that Outlook on the web didn't make it everywhere just yet. Simplified patching. So it's a lot easier if you're only patching a web browser. The last use case is interesting. It's one that I stumbled across while preparing something else technically and testing something that if you're using what's called rights management. So there used to be this thing that was Active Directory rights management. It was brutal to install and configure. It's better now that it runs in Azure, better on the server side. There's a lot of client-side work, but you'll notice one thing, too, if you happen to try to use it. People will report issues with Outlook near immediately. When that system gets installed, when you are first using it, if you come across new policies, it has to get effectively decryption keys. Everything is encrypted, very, very secure, but it takes a lot of time to do those things. So as a result, you're going to pick up a performance impact, honestly, about a 70% performance hit if you're using it with the Outlook client. So it's something to consider. If you must have those functions on, maybe Outlook Outlook on the web is a better choice than the Outlook client. It really comes down to what's the better experience for your users and what will they accept. For me, I typically use my Outlook client on my Mac, but if I have to do anything with an RMS encrypted document, I'm going right to the web. It is much more efficient. There is some early support on the Mac, but it's difficult. There's a lot of pieces that are still being finished or being improved as a Mac user. I haven't tested the newer stuff on Windows other than I know when I send things to a Windows user, the immediate response is my Outlook client hangs. So even from a perception standpoint, without tracking the actual time hit that you're going to get, you're going to see an increase.
Yeah, and I saw that earlier too. You sent me that one email with that, and I was like, what?
Yeah. I mean, it can really have an impact on while it has to recover these keys. We could get into firewall impacts, and it really just becomes a much bigger discussion of what's the most manageable or the best way to get users what they need. Honestly, look, in my opinion, one of the reasons that Microsoft has been highly successful with Office 365 is that they gave Exchange users a route to the cloud using a client they were used to. As I mentioned, Garth and I did Domino migrations. Those Domino clients used a client application largely as well. They wanted a mail client. People tend to like mail clients. Most people, or a statistical portion of the business population at the moment. It's more than half. There are people who do prefer browser-based. Interestingly, there are a lot of complaints about the new OA from people that are like G Suite users where they just have a different set of expectations. But I would argue that G Suite interface has always been their client, so it's really a different kind of a client dispute that they might have. But a lot of people in the Microsoft space prefer the full client. A couple of big benefits: multiple 365 mailboxes. I'm on a Mac. I have 3 different mailboxes that are loaded. Non-365 mailboxes. It's easier if you're going other places. If you have on-premises apps, line of business apps, things that need third-party plugins, some of them can run in this newer Outlook productivity style, but not all of them. I would also, pretty quickly put out there that we've got better, offline caching for highly mobile employees. Personally, I would never work off of, the offline version of Outlook on the web. It's my personal preference. I just have a strong, strong feeling that it's not, what is best if you're traveling a lot. And at times I do travel a lot. So, again, user preference. What is going to keep your employee population, moving? What's going to keep them productive?
Right, and don't forget too, you can also have multiple mailboxes in Outlook on the web, if those mailboxes are a member of the same tenant.
Yes, and that's a good point that Garth brings up. You can actually do like, slash at the end of the slash OWA URL that's there. You just give it, slash email address, and assuming you have the delegate rights, it's something you're allowed to see or allowed to connect to, you can open it. And I immediately go to the people who will, think, well, wait a minute, I know of ways to use multiple credentials and have different tabs with multiple credentials. And yes, I can think of incredibly complicated workarounds too. But we're speaking about, employee productivity here, keeping people working, keeping yourself working. It gives me a headache even thinking about what we might have to go through to keep it working nicely and smoothly. So I wanted to, we'll get into the question that we initially raised, looking at, when you switch to the new OWA, is it faster? Now, I've got a really, again, interesting point in my opinion here. We spend a lot of time talking to customers, reviewing, what pain they're going through, talking to them about their employees. And honestly, at the end of the day, people open tickets drive, IT departments and executives to want to or to need to resolve problems. So when we came up with the concept here, we stumbled across an article that was posted by a Microsoft person on the tech community site, but it was an interesting article, and you'll get that link when we send the deck out to anyone who asks for it. But the article actually began with a statement designed to be fast. However, the content inside of this really got into the user experience, and it was talking about how much faster people could be. It's an interesting paradigm, just as something to consider. Don't worry, we'll show you numbers in a second. But as a paradigm to consider, if it takes an extra second to load, but you are, consistently faster throughout your day, does that really matter? It's a question that people need to start looking at. I mean, I hope many people have. When you go to the cloud, if we, we have data testing we've done for customers direct where on-premises exchange, well-built on-prem exchange, not poorly built, but a well-built on-premises exchange environment will outperform the cloud. That's a very isolated view of reality. We're ignoring the cost to run it. We're ignoring the cost of support. You're ignoring the cost of downtime. And you're ignoring the fact that do those metrics really matter? I mean, if people are getting more ways to get things done, is that actually the key metric? I'm just simply posing the question because I can tell you from our feedback with our customers, every environment's different. Every user population is different. They have different things that they care about and different things that they look at. But you need to be looking at the bigger picture. It is really just, the message I'm saying or making sure that you consider. If something is impacting people, we want to know why, because that's taking away from productivity. The stats that they're not complaining about are the ones that, you watch them, but they're not the most critical, apparently, to your user population. And every population is different. Before I go to the next slide on the results that we have back, I made a mistake. And so I'm going to classify that and then show you what I do have as firm numbers. During the process of the data gathering for this webinar, I moved from a 5.5 miles, so roughly 8.8 kilometers, not very far, from one office location to another, same internet provider. I did increase speed from 300 megabits to 940 megabits, which you can download a DVD. Yeah, it's ridiculous, but however, I didn't take that into account until I was over the last day and a half here trying to figure out where this anomaly came from in my data. The problem is some of my historical data came from the previous network, and as I traced down, we gather a lot of information that is secondary. When we're doing when our software is running and gathering test results, we're always looking for, is it working? What's the response time that users are seeing? We also gather standard network metrics, all of the things that, trace route, path ping, anything you want to dig into. the data is available, but it's not something you need when it's working. You look at it when you're trying to figure out what's different, what has changed, why is it not working. So great secondary info. So I dug into my secondary info and I realized that I completely forgot that I moved offices in the middle of my test bed, and I have between a 7 to 17% variance in my total test time. But I've got a bigger issue too. I literally, 5 miles. It's a 10-minute drive between the two office locations. And my one office location on the very same fiber provider routed through Baltimore. It's on the east coast of the U.S. In my new office location, my traffic all routes through Philadelphia. And so right away, if I'm really getting down to when we have to solve problems, we like to get very, very accurate. We focus first. Is it working? Are people getting what they need? When you need to solve problems, we gather all that detail. It's just the secondary tier. I discovered that I had forgotten to take into account the fact that I tripled the speed and, had new routes. So we went back through. I gathered data even this morning from my development team from a different set of information because I wanted to see what I could statistically show held up across both the old network environment and the new network environment. And although this is not the normal format, I will give you a blog post, we'll say within the next month or so here, which I'm going to say give me 6 weeks to be safe, because if not, person who runs marketing will be very upset with me, but we'll give you all the standard details and graphs that we normally do. There's a lot of cool things that I actually saw as I dug in terms of even Outlook performance changes that the additional speed is showing that we haven't noticed before. So it's cool, great stuff to dig into. Here's what we saw for OA. When I took an anonymized, took the average and looked at the average range from data that we had in several offices, data I had stored in an Azure-based environment that was not on this fiber connection that I moved, looked at the data from my fiber connection before and my fiber connection after, and I really just broke it down to come up with an overall summary that we could talk about, because the individual actions I do see fluctuations in that I have to look at more carefully, and the data is not clean enough. But if I look at the entire test set, comparing this again across, I would call it honestly 4 different locations, I've got a very similar percentage of impact. So if I look at the newer version of OA, my average load time, and these are in milliseconds, my average load time is coming in at about, 4,400. So just a little, little under 4.5 seconds to load. If I look at the old OA interface, then I'm in a situation where I am faced with, about 4.9 seconds to load. So it's about 10% quicker that we're seeing as a result. Again, I saw a very similar percentage change in 4 different environments. So that the percentage holds when I look at that. Likewise on the median. So the median, that's the number that half them are above this, half them are below that. Different than the average. It looks at the the number of entries, and big swings don't impact it as much. So the median, 4.1 seconds roughly to 4.7 seconds on the older version of OA. Now the next one actually is where it gets interesting. So standard deviation, look, this is the possible swing effectively. So when we're trying to determine if data is statistically relevant, you should be watching for how big is the swing. The bigger that swing is between one end and the other, and we're trying to see how reliable, how, standardized the numbers are. As you get to bigger deviations, it means that there's a bigger variance. The data has bigger, peaks and bigger valleys, or lower valleys. I'm not sure which is the better way to say that. But so this actually really was interesting. And again, I saw a very similar pattern across the 4 different sets of data that I dug through. The older OA, although it is, a little seemingly slower to load, and this is our entire test battery that we've run through, again, because of some of the, individual metrics underneath that I wanted to take more time and look into. I standardized on a the entire test battery just to help integrate those metrics as a full set, looking at what someone may do. But the standard deviation went from 1,800 milliseconds, so 1.8 second swing. So from the best case to the worst case, this is where we're going to be. Looking at, but the standard deviation looking at in the newer version is actually 33% more, coming in at over 2.4 seconds or 2,400 milliseconds. That's a really big increase in the standard deviation. So it tells me that the newer client, while yes, half of the ones are, the median is lower, the average is lower, but I put in the max. Look, the max could have been anything. We do different torture items to this. And like I said, I really took all of our different data sets, averaged them out just to see if I got similar patterns, and I do. And that's why this was a nice representative pattern. But the max on the new is about 20% higher. And that's just one example of how bad it could be when we're torturing it, doing things to it, using bad proxies. It was an interesting item to look at that it's a little slower on the old OA, but it's a little more resilient at times too. My assumptions until we get a clean rerun of this data that anybody who wants it will send you the blog post when we write it. But looking at the data that we have gathered, the newer OA, maybe because of all of the new functionality and the explosions and the balloons, or quite honestly, the better integration to some of the back-end components could also be doing this. But if it's going to have a variance, it's going to be higher. So usually quicker, but if something's wrong, you're going to see a bigger swing in there. And it's, you can tell I get excited when I talk about the data part here, and we're kind of running towards the end of our time, but the fact that even when you make identify that you've done something or caught a mistake inside of the data, we really do put a lot of time into digging into these and working through them. And as we ran through these items that were in here, that variance range is pretty consistent across the different environments, one of which is data out of France. So it's generally speaking, it is seemingly a sustainable performance swing. So I guess you could say, as the average or median, it is generally speaking going to be the new OA is in fact faster.
Very interesting stuff for sure.
So we can go to see if we have any question or answer items that are in there, any of the questions that have come in.
I see one here. They're asking to sort of describe what type of testing you did, what type of tests were done.
Yeah, so our standard test battery includes normally opening up the mailbox. We upload the same, when we're for webinars like this, not for a customer environment, but for a webinar where we want consistent data, we will pick a standardized attachment that normally we want one that does not compress well, although I would love to talk sometime about what we see from compressible versus non-compressible content sizes, because there are some interesting changes in those mechanisms that, again, I have to avoid talking about because we'll go forever. But so really you log in, we'll typically do file upload, download, a FreeBusy lookup, a meeting invites. In terms of here, like I said, because I didn't have time to really tear into the test variances that we have encountered, I did not want to highlight any of those. So I just took an anonymized overall data set, looking at all of the testing, as a singular execution time. And that did prove to be, like I said, consistent in terms of the variance percentage in different environments. Yeah, so there are there are some comment or feedback questions about missing capabilities. OS cloud locations, which yes, some of these are there are improvements in there. Some of them are still needing further improvements. there's a question on shared mailboxes. If you have the access rights, you can. It depends upon how they've been shared with you. I guess that would be the answer I would give on shared mailboxes, if they can be seen online or not. They can always be connected, by the way, is the way that Garth mentioned, where you can do a / email address as long as you have the appropriate rights to open the mailbox. And then just looking at another question, does it support graphics in the signature field? I didn't pay attention, to be honest, and I need to, because we do keep a graphic in our signature, and I don't recall if I put it in there or not. It's just an interesting effect. Another question that came in on, in Google Chrome, typing an email address and the cursor jumped to the right. There is, and this is actually an interesting thing to note too, the auto cache behavior. Well, so there are two possibilities, but Chrome can do an auto fill. I'm assuming that the user may have known about that, but otherwise there is a different set of previously used email addresses that are cached depending upon your Outlook version, and that includes Outlook on the web. It actually, although I keep these multiple mailboxes loaded, on my Mac, it'll make me crazy, that one functionality, because it'll pull it from a mailbox I don't really use for anything other than if I have to subscribe to something I don't trust, and now I've got all these entries that show. So depending upon the way that it looked, I would think that it is coming out or acting as a an autocomplete based upon the previous cache for OA, which would be different than what you would have in your Outlook version, depending upon your configuration, what Outlook you're running, who you've emailed before. But that would be my assumption.
Right, and the one key thing to also keep in mind as well is that it's new, so a lot of the features are still maturing as we speak. So I'm sure they'll get it all together and make it more functional as they see fit.
Yeah. So we have a few more that have come in, but we will get the answers back to you in an email response, because we are a little over here on time, and we try to keep these shorter so that we're not taking up too much of your time. Any questions we did not answer, we will get a response out to. And if you would like us to send you the link when we do post the detailed subset of results, just let us know, and we'll make sure that we follow up and send that part out.
Thank you, everyone, for your participation.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.